Hello and welcome to Airheads, a not-so-serious look at the serious business of royal rumours, gossip and gowns. I'm Tom.
And I'm Maeve.
And oh my god. Oh my god.
We have had very little sleep. It is Monday night. We stayed up till after 3 watching the interview last night. The interview by Oprah Winfrey with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle.
Yeah, we found it so hard to relax on Sunday in anticipation of the interview. We ended up going to both Luminary Bakery and Violet Bakery, both of Meghan's faves, and then tried to get some sleep, and then woke up and just were frantically looking for links to watch the interview.
Yeah, that was when they shared the teaser about the concerns over Archie's skin colour.
Yeah.
And at that point, my head exploded and I'm still recovering.
Yeah. It was so worth staying up and watching it live, though.
Oh my god, yeah. I feel like I've witnessed history.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, sitting there watching the TV and thinking, like, I'm always going to remember seeing this as it was airing. Because, like, even then, you know, we went to bed and then in the morning when I got up, so many push notifications with all the key takeaways, some of which are so shocking. And if I woke up and seen all those on my phone, out of the context of them talking, it really, I think, would have robbed it of so much of its power.
You wouldn't have had that experience of screaming at the TV at 2:20 a.m.
Yeah.
But before we start talking about the content of the interview, I thought we could talk a little bit about the structure of it, because some of our listeners were asking us, why did Oprah split it up to have the sort of one-on-one with Meghan at the start before Harry came in and joined? And originally it had been billed as a 90-minute special, so that the first hour would be with Meghan and then 30 minutes with Meghan and Harry. But then when it was extended to 2 hours, it ended up being half and half. But I still think it was very purposeful, obviously, and very significant that it opened with just Meghan and Oprah, because I felt like, you know, this was obviously a drama. They were telling a story here, and this was very clearly framing Meghan as the protagonist of that story, and at the same time presenting a very powerful and candid discussion between two very high profile black women, which is something that we rarely see on such a big platform as this.
By bringing Harry in later and actually asking him some of the same questions that she had asked Meghan, she got to fill in gaps or get another perspective on what was going on. I suppose, in Harry's case, from somebody who's been in that institution for a lot longer than Meghan. So it was very interesting because of that.
Yeah, because you kind of had Meghan portrayed as the outsider, and then to get her perspective, followed by the perspective of the ultimate insider, Harry. And I thought it was such an interesting approach, asking Harry almost word for word some of the same questions, but we'll get on to Oprah's technique a little bit later.
Yeah.
I thought we should start by looking at how they introduced the interview with that opening montage, giving the kind of recap of Harry and Meghan's story to date. And you had the very fairy tale-esque wedding shots right up to this sort of anti-fairy tale that they find themselves in now, at war with the royal family.
Yeah, it was so dramatic, and also makes so much sense if you've been watching this unfold, because that is really how it has felt at times. We first meet Oprah and Meghan, though, sitting in this incredibly beautiful outdoor lounge area just round at a friend's house. It seemed like it was somewhere they met in the middle on whatever luxury street they live on. Oprah was saying she lives up the road, Meghan lives down the road.
But I guess that was their way of making clear that this is not Harry and Meghan's house.
Yeah.
Oprah also says that Harry and Meghan were not told any of her questions in advance and that they weren't getting paid for the interview. I believe all of that.
Yeah, I definitely thought there were moments where both Harry and Meghan seemed to really have to consider what they wanted to say in response to the questions. It wasn't this kind of quick answers that might imply that they had time to prepare.
Yeah, and they weren't comfortable all the time either. Oprah, I thought, started off with kind of all the questions that people would want to ask Meghan if they met her, like what's it like having a royal wedding and what's it like meeting the Queen and those kind of things, and asking Meghan how she felt on her wedding day. And the way Meghan talks about it, she makes it very clear that in her view the wedding wasn't really her day or Harry and Meghan's day. It was a spectacle for the world. And she describes it as an out-of-body experience that she was very present for. So Meghan.
Yeah, very Meghan language. And I thought it was a good detail that they revealed that the vows that they have framed on their wall are not the vows from that ceremony, but they're from their secret wedding, which was officiated by the Archbishop of Canterbury 3 days before the one that we all saw on May 19th.
They did have to do a little bit of backtracking on that today, though. I saw people getting very upset that the big spectacle of the wedding was a lie. And Town and Country's royal correspondent Victoria Murphy clarified that Meghan and Harry were not legally married 3 days before their wedding. A source close to them acknowledges this and says Meghan was describing a private exchange of vows in the interview, but their legal marriage was on May 19th.
It just seemed to me like such a Harry and Meghan thing that for them, what they consider to be their real special moment, that their real marriage is not the legally accepted one, it's the one that was just in their backyard. It was like such a
with the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Yeah, but don't you think it's such like a Harry and Meghan narrative?
Yeah, of course. Oprah asks Meghan about her expectations during the early days dating Harry, or during their courtship, as Meghan puts it. And Meghan does admit that she was naive going into it, but the level of naivety on display is really striking to me. And it did make me slightly wonder, because she says that she didn't research the royals or Google anything about Harry before meeting him, and that's wild behaviour to me.
Yeah, and I found it really hard to believe that she didn't think she'd have to curtsy when she met the Queen. Like, I know it's ridiculous, and I can understand not wanting to have to do that, but I just feel like you would know that there would be that kind of ridiculousness involved.
I think there's a couple of things to that, because one of the things that what Meghan and Oprah both seemed to be in agreement on was that the American view of the royals is that they're celebrities.
Yeah.
And when Meghan says she thought that kind of curtsying would just be part of the fanfare outside, but not in private moments between family, that I can believe that Americans would think that. But I think in terms of her personal relationship with Harry, just like anyone that you're meeting for the first time,
yeah,
like that's just what people do now. You Google them, and it kind of made me think, like, did she want to sort of maintain this image, sort of flattering image of herself as above Googling the royals?
Yeah, and was it part of, cementing this image of, like, the utter trust and bond between her and Harry, that right from the get-go, she was content to only know what he was sharing with her about his family and about himself?
Yeah, and I think I said to you when we were watching it, like, does she know about the Nazi uniform?
Yeah.
Like, if she hasn't Googled him? And she said, I only know what he has told me. When did he tell her about that? But the other thing that I wanted to say that struck me about her not knowing about having to curtsy to the Queen is, to me, that's on Harry, because that shows that he really failed to prepare her or tell her about any of the more, like, fucking ridiculous aspects of his lifestyle. Like, didn't tell her until they were literally in the car on the way to meet the Queen, and that it was up to Fergie to have to come in and teach Meghan how to do it.
It's so funny to me that Fergie is the one who's giving her advice on how to keep the royals on side and how to do things by the book. Like,
she is the most unlikely royal mentor to come out of this interview.
It was so funny as well, the ease with which Meghan talked about Fergie. And, I mean, obviously she as well said that she had known Eugenie before she met Harry, and that they had this kind of friendship beforehand. So clearly that relationship was already there.
Meghan says, there were certain things you couldn't do, but unlike the movies, there was no class on how to speak, how to cross your legs, how to be royal. which came as a little bit of a surprise to me because, as we know from the Lifetime movie, princesses are supposed to get the kidnapping training.
Yeah, that was my favourite part of the movie, and I was very disappointed to hear that this never happened.
I did sort of get a slight sense that maybe Kate may have received training like that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, there was all sorts of talk about how Kate learned how to get out of a car the right way and all that kind of stuff. But Meghan apparently didn't even know your national anthem, Tom.
And that's beyond the pale. But she was apparently Googling late at night how to sing the national anthem, so I'm very pleased she put the work in.
That to me is just like, if you're already in a new relationship with someone and you find yourself watching YouTube videos of how to sing their national anthem, and the national anthem is fucking God Save the Queen, get out.
We also found out that the Sussexes have chickens, which they rescued from a battery farm and relocated to Archie's Chick Inn.
Loved that so much.
Very funny.
Loved the prominence of chickens in the Harry-Meghan romance.
Yeah.
From the roast chicken they made when Harry proposed to these rescue chickens that they care for in their Montecito mansion.
Do they eat the chicken?
You just kept asking that. Probably top 3 lines of the interview for me was Meghan, I just love rescuing.
Yeah, it's so funny.
Like, she was talking about how Guy, her beagle, was a rescue dog, as well as these chickens. And clearly there was another form of rescuing being implied here.
Her rescue husband.
That she saved from an archaic institution.
Yeah.
I did think it was a little bit funny when Oprah asked Meghan what is the one word to describe her new life, and she said peace. And then the next segment of the interview was into this like blazing hot gossip about Kate Middleton.
I know, and this was like really the first time my jaw dropped in this interview.
Yeah, and it was like 25 minutes in.
Oprah straight up asks Meghan, did you make Kate cry?
And Meghan says no, but then she goes on to say the reverse happened.
Fucking hell.
That's a killer.
Yeah.
This is obviously in reference to Tightsgate, one of our favourite royal scandals of all time.
Yeah.
Where Meghan and Kate allegedly had some sort of screaming feud over flesh-coloured tights for the bridesmaids at Meghan's wedding. And there were many versions of this story. The one that Oprah was talking about was to do with the bridesmaid's dress for Princess Charlotte. And Meghan does acknowledge that this was obviously a very stressful time.
Mm.
The wedding being likely to be this huge, globally scrutinised, televised event. Also everything going on with her father, Thomas Markle. But the way she explains it is sort of something like, a few days before the wedding, Kate, was upset about flower girl dresses and it made me cry. It really hurt my feelings. And in the context of everything else that was going on in the days before the wedding, it didn't make sense that she wasn't trying to be supportive given what was going on with my dad.
And Oprah pushes for more details on what exactly Kate said. And Meghan goes, I don't think it's fair to her to get into the details of that because she apologised and I've forgiven her. Apparently Kate sent her flowers and Meghan emphasised that she's not in any way mad with her anymore and that she's a good person.
Yeah, it seemed like the bigger issue isn't what Kate supposedly did, but that this story that Meghan made Kate cry emerged 7 months later and was never corrected, and the fact that story was the opposite of what Meghan says happened.
Mm. Yeah, because the creation of a story like that doesn't come out of like a brief moment of anger or, you know, misdirected stress or whatever it is, but it comes from a kind of cold calculation on someone's part of like, let's take this story, reverse the roles, allow it to be leaked, and then nobody's going to deny it.
Yeah, and Meghan says that this was a turning point. I thought that was really a standout for me in giving me a sense of how much of a role the media plays in the family's relationships with each other. That, like, the fact that Kate and Meghan had this fight, this little argument, disagreement, however small it may have been, the fact that when the media came into it, that's when it blew up.
Yeah. And that it was weaponized by someone.
And Meghan does say, I'm not sharing that piece about Kate in any way to be disparaging about her. I think it's important for people to understand the truth, and that Meghan would hope that Kate would have wanted that corrected.
That was a great line.
Despite the fact that she didn't correct it.
Yeah, exactly. There were a lot of people defending Kate around this. They were saying, you know, she had recently given birth herself to Louis, and I just think those people are really missing the point. Because Meghan doesn't seem to have an axe to grind with Kate, or doesn't seem to care about this argument anymore. And she makes the point that the problem here is this polarity that has happened. You know, she says, if you love her, you don't need to hate me. And if you love me, you don't need to hate her.
Yeah, and this struck me as a really concise statement that I think a lot of fans need to hear.
Yeah.
It's just such a basic thing that you can have problems with both women, but you don't need to pit them against each other. However, I did see some black women pointing out that Meghan may have felt that she needed to couch the story in those kind of terms like forgiveness and goodness and those kind of things, to make it more palatable to the audience.
Yeah.
Similarly, when Oprah asks Meghan why there is a double standard for press treatment of her and Kate, Meghan says she doesn't know. Of course she knows.
Yeah, of course she does. We all know what the difference is.
Yeah.
But yeah, she doesn't explicitly say that it's, you know, it's because I'm not white.
Yeah, and it's telling that she can talk about race to a certain extent, but seems to feel that she can only be so explicit about it.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd say that has to have a lot to do with the fact that we've seen today that in the UK, people take being accused of being racist way more seriously than people actually being racist.
Yeah, I this is a good way to lead into the whole issue of the double standards applied to Kate and Meghan in the media, because, guys, Oprah read that BuzzFeed article just like the rest of us, and she has some notes that she reads out to Meghan. We all know the examples of the cradling the baby bump, eating the avocado toast.
Oh my god. Meghan, her response, that incredible line, that's a really loaded piece of toast.
Isn't it?
I've already booked my tattoo appointment.
There was so much in this interview that they ended up having a load of extra bonus clips that were released on CBS This Morning today. And one of them that I really wish they had left in was Meghan speaking in a bit more detail about comparisons of the press treatment of her and Kate when they first entered the family, specifically Kate being tagged Weighty Katie. And she says, while I imagine that was really hard, this is not the same. And her main point is, rude and racist are not the same.
So good, and such an incredible soundbite as well. I did think this first part of the interview gave me so much more insight into members of the royal family than I was expecting on
Absolutely.
a very personal level. But then Meghan played it very safe when she was talking about the Queen.
She positively gushed over the Queen because she gave her some pearls and shared a blanket with her one time on a train. But one thing she says in the interview is, there's the family and then there's the people that are running the institution. Those are two separate things, and it's important to be able to compartmentalise that, because the Queen, for example, has always been wonderful to me.
Like we said after the James Corden appearance by Harry, the Sussexes are much better than anybody else in the royal family at humanising the Queen specifically, but in general, members of the family. They come across as very warm and sincere when they're talking about people in a positive manner. I'm not sure that I quite believe this view of the Queen.
No way. Something is not adding up here to me, because the distinction that Meghan makes there, I don't think we should be separating those things, the Queen and the institution, because we get these competing narratives that the Queen is, you know, the ultimate girl boss. She has been at the top of her game for so long. She knows everything. She is the all-seeing, all-knowing fount of wisdom. Yet, also simultaneously puppeteered by these anonymous men in grey suits, that she's actually not running the show, and therefore she can't be held responsible for any of the bad stuff that happens. But you can't have both. And it seems like they want to have it both ways at different times in this interview.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it was disappointing to me because I would like to feel like they're being really straight talking about the Queen. But I do understand why they would pull their punches, because I feel like that is dropping a nuke on this this war that's going on. But Meghan goes on to point out the irony of having been someone who advocated for women's rights for so many years, only to end up in an institution where she was silent. And that's where we get the famous line from one of the teaser clips where Oprah says, "Were you silent or were you silenced?"
And Meghan says the latter. She goes on to describe a process of isolation whereby palace aides took away her passport, her driver's license, her keys, and would seemingly control whether she was allowed to go outside at all or meet her friends. That they allegedly told her to lay low because she was oversaturated, and if she went out for lunch it wouldn't look right. So Meghan says she only left the house twice in 4 months. And I thought the way she put it was really good. She said, "I'm everywhere, but I'm nowhere." And I can see how you would feel that way, because the coverage of her was so loud, but we didn't actually see her doing any of the normal stuff, like when we would see Kate going to Bluebird in Chelsea, or any of those kind of normal things. Yeah. Even now when we see like Beatrice and Eugenie going to Annabelle's or any of those kind of places.
Yeah, Kate popping to Waterstones to get some books on military history. George.
The big bombshell in this interview, though, came when they were talking about Meghan's first pregnancy. And Meghan mentioned that there were issues raised about what Archie's title would be and the implications that would have on his security.
A lot of smug royal experts came out of the woodwork today, only too pleased to note that it appears Meghan believed decisions about titles and whether Archie would get security were linked together.
And we've spoken about this before, I think, that Archie was not eligible for a title the moment he was born, but that he will or would instead become HRH Prince Archie when Charles becomes king. And the royals did make an exemption to this rule for the Cambridge kids, because at the time only Prince George was eligible, but they changed it so Charlotte and Louis got those titles as well. And Meghan seemed to be suggesting that they were planning to change that convention again to exclude Archie from ever receiving a title. And I do find all this stuff is like stupidly complicated, and I fucking hate titles anyway, as I've made clear many times in this podcast. But the main takeaway is that Meghan says the stories that we heard so often that Harry and Meghan had declined a title for Archie were not true, and that apparently wasn't their choice to make. As to whose choice it was, that's not made clear.
Yeah, like, is it the Queen? Is it Charles? Will we ever know?
I've got to say, like, the transcript isn't out for this interview yet, but I would not be surprised if the most commonly used word was security. Security came up time and again in this interview, and crucial to the discussions about Archie's title and security, Meghan says, was the fact of him being the first member of colour in the royal family. And this is when she says there were concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born.
This was another real
screaming.
Jaw-dropping moment, yeah. I couldn't believe that she said there were several conversations.
Yeah, and that they were with Harry. That Harry was the one who was consulted about this, and then he would then relay these conversations to Meghan.
How can you even begin to unpack the levels of racism, misogyny, and snobbery that all mesh together in that situation?
I don't know how you recover from that as a family.
Yeah.
That leaves such a deep scar.
Yeah, and as we'll get onto later, Harry does go pretty easy on his family at times. And I don't know how you, like you say, recover from conversations like this with family members to a point where you want to keep those people in your life.
Yeah, and it certainly was Meghan who volunteered this piece of information.
Yeah.
And then Oprah asks whether there were concerns that the child would be too brown and if that would be a problem. And Meghan just says, if that's the assumption you're making, that's a pretty safe one.
Throughout this, actually, Meghan is really masterful in terms of what she says and what she merely confirms or allows you to assume without giving like an actual quote or soundbite that you can take, which I just hats off to her.
Oprah, like the rest of us, obviously wants to know who said it, but Meghan refuses to name names and says, I think that would be very damaging to them.
And then it comes up again later when Harry joins them. Oprah asks him who said it, and he says, that conversation I'm never going to share. At the time, it was awkward. I was a bit shocked.
That is a fucking mild way of putting it.
Yeah.
I was raging when Meghan mentioned this.
Yeah.
And listening to Harry talk about it in these kinds of terms like awkward, a bit shocked.
Yeah.
How is this not burn it all down?
I know, because obviously you can imagine Harry and Meghan talking to each other about how their child is going to be treated depending on the colour of his skin. Like, that makes so much sense, and I'm sure it's a conversation that happens all the time between parents. When another family member comes in to tell you their thoughts on it, their concerns, this does not sound like they had Archie's best interests at heart. I don't think you would get the reaction you get from Meghan if they were thinking of Archie in this situation. It seems like they were thinking about what this would look like for the royal family.
I mean, Meghan literally says they were asking what that would mean or look like. What the fuck would that mean? What do you think it's going to mean?
Yeah.
In her interview with CBS this morning, Oprah said that Harry told her off screen and in fact urged her to share that it was not the Queen or Prince Philip who expressed these concerns.
This was so funny because on the one hand, yes, it's like, you know, we're not saying that the Queen is a racist, don't worry, we're being good for the Queen, but also it's saying that actually it's not the oldest generation of royals who are thinking in this way.
Or the one that you would assume because he has a history of making racist remarks.
So it seems to us that it's either Will or Charles.
Yeah, and I mean, we were dying to know, obviously, but it was funny to me to see royalists like really fucking losing it over this, saying that Harry and Meghan, by not naming names, are just encouraging people to speculate about which member of the family might be racist, as if this whole like shit show hasn't been evidence enough that the entire family is racist.
So funny. Like, any conversation which implies that only one member of this family could possibly be racist is ridiculous.
The final part of Meghan's one-on-one with Oprah was the most affecting, the hardest to watch.
Yeah.
The most emotional, when Meghan speaks very candidly about how much her mental health suffered during her pregnancy, and she says that she considered suicide in early 2019. She tells Oprah, I just didn't want to be alive anymore. And that was a very clear and real and frightening constant thought.
She describes being scared by thoughts in the middle of the night that are very clear, and says, this isn't some abstract idea. This is methodical, and this is not who I am.
I was really struck by how, I mean, obviously how brave she was in speaking about it, but she was so honest about it. And she says that she wanted to check into hospital at that point and get inpatient treatment. And she spoke to one of the most senior people in the palace about it, but that nothing was ever done. She says, I went to the institution and I said that I needed to go somewhere to get help. And I was told that I couldn't, that it wouldn't be good for the institution.
This is presumably the same HR department that's going to be investigating the bullying claims that were in the papers last week against Meghan.
Some listeners were asking us why Prince Harry has been able to receive therapy and has spoken out about getting therapy, but that Meghan wasn't provided with a therapist. I would say talking to a therapist is very different from getting inpatient treatment, and that it's much more discreet to speak to a therapist than to check into a hospital. So I would imagine that they would have different views on something like that. I don't know if a member of the royal family has ever done anything like that, and I would imagine it would be very difficult to keep that under wraps.
Yeah. Which is not obviously an excuse
Oh,
for
no,
denying
of course
it.
not.
No, I know that's not what
No.
you're saying, but just worth clarifying. But Meghan specifically recalls photos from an event at the Royal Albert Hall from the same night that she first shared with Harry that she was feeling suicidal. And she talks about how the photos from that event haunt her because all she sees when she looks at them is Harry gripping her hand really tight. And she remembers that once the lights went off for the performance, she just wept in the royal box until the lights came up again.
It's awful because she was saying that Harry told her to stay at home, but that she said she felt like she couldn't be alone.
Yeah.
And then she had to go to a fucking Cirque du Soleil performance.
I know.
Oprah brings this up again, though, when Harry joins them. And this bit to me was major. She asks him if he went to other members of his family for help for Meghan. And he just says, no, he didn't. That's not a conversation that would be had. I guess I was ashamed of admitting it to them. I don't know whether they would have the same feelings or thoughts. It's a very trapping environment that a lot of them are stuck in. And Oprah clarifies that with him and says, you were ashamed of admitting that Meghan needed help. And he just says, yeah.
He's so unapologetic, and I loved that Oprah... Well, one, I think the expression on her face said a lot at that moment, but also she just let him sit in that. He had the chance, I think, to apologise or to talk about how that is not good behaviour, but he didn't.
That was a real low point for me watching it, because he goes on then to talk about how Prince Charles and Prince William are trapped and sort of making excuses for them, I thought, basically acting as an apologist for the family, not the institution, when it's clear to me at least that he really let Meghan down here.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think this is just more evidence that this is not a family that should ever be trusted to speak about mental health.
Oh my God. For them, mental health activism is a pet project. It's empty posturing to inflate their own position. And as we've seen time and again, when they're faced with an actual mental health crisis, they're only too happy to turn their backs, or worse, brief the press on Harry and Meghan being fragile or weak or unstable.
Taking this line and trying to promote this idea that actually admitting vulnerability is a brave thing to do and can be transformed into great strength. But they don't apply that to themselves at all. And they clearly don't believe it when it comes to other members of the family. Like you're saying with the words like fragile about Harry, when that is such a triggering and toxic word for people who are going through mental health issues.
Especially because it felt like a big part of the Heads Together campaign was about ending the stigma around talking about mental health, and the idea that it doesn't need to be something that is kept in the shadows or discussed and dealt with behind closed doors, when it seems like that is literally what happened to Meghan.
And the way Harry says that he has no idea whether anyone else in his family might have had thoughts like Meghan's or might be struggling with anything similar because they just don't talk about it.
what makes these people equipped to be some of the country's most high-profile mental health advocates?
Absolutely fuck all. But Meghan speaking out here about struggling with her mental health is actually the kind of thing that will help people. It's the kind of thing that can have a tangible impact in a way that other royals' very vague endorsements of talking generally just don't. They just don't have the same impact.
Yeah.
I did think it was a bit surprising that they didn't give any details about how Meghan recovered. Like, if she went and got treatment elsewhere. I mean, obviously they don't need to give us the intimate details if they don't want to, but it would maybe have helped kind of round that story out.
But back to Harry, when he joined them for the second half of the show, Harry and Meghan straight away revealed that Meghan is pregnant with a girl.
Yeah, that was a great moment.
They aren't planning to have any more kids.
Yeah, which didn't come as a surprise because Harry has kind of mentioned that in passing.
To Jane Goodall.
Yeah. But as expected, Harry once again highlights his hatred of the British press, and he spoke in particular about an invisible contract between the tabloids and the palace, which gives the tabloids a level of control by fear.
His language here was so dramatic.
Yeah.
Meghan chipped in then to say that the tabloids even have holiday parties at the palace. That's how close of a relationship they have. I didn't know that, and I have seen tabloid reporters refuting that today.
But Harry's portrait then of the royals as cowering in fear of the tabloids in case they turn on them did strike me as like a bit pathetic, and again part of this apologist attitude he had towards members of his family.
It sounds like making excuses for bad behaviour, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, he does later call them out for staying silent during the racist attacks on Meghan. He says, no one from my family ever said anything over those 3 years. That hurts. Still, though, his description of Charles and Will when he says they're trapped, they don't get to leave their roles, and I have huge compassion for that. For that, I read, they are victims of a cruel system. They're living in a gilded cage, and he feels so sorry for them, and we should also feel sorry for them and have great sympathy for them.
And that, you know, it would be one thing if the only stuff we ever heard from the royals or from palace sources was them, like, you know, shoveling out pictures of their kids whenever the tabloids wanted them or whatever. But that's just not the case. Like, you constantly see stuff leaked from the palace about other members of the royal family, mainly Harry and Meghan. Like, their interactions with the press, or their team's interaction with their press, seems to be as malicious as what the tabloids have been accused of doing.
I mean, absolutely, it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
I saw a good tweet from Crystal from The Read, who said that Harry is still trying to protect people who have made it clear that their love for him is conditional.
Yeah, such a good way of putting it.
Yeah, because it strikes me as him feeling like he does need to protect them, and that he feels shame that he doesn't want to reveal who was asking about how dark Archie's skin was going to be, because he is ashamed for them and doesn't want to embarrass them.
Yeah, which is a really bullshit attitude to have.
If those are the concerns of one of the future kings of this country, I honestly do feel that I'm entitled to know.
Yeah. If he's worried about what someone with brown skin will look like in his family, how does he feel about the makeup of the country he's going to be ruling?
As usual, Harry reserves most of his vitriol for the tabloids. And there was a new clip that came out today, an extra clip, that had him referring to a time that he was talking to someone at a Santa Ballet fundraiser who has a lot of media contacts, friends with a lot of newspaper editors, and this person said that the press would ruin Harry's life if he continued to speak out against how they were treating Meghan, because the UK is bigoted. And Harry completely disagreed and said the UK is not bigoted, the UK press is bigoted, specifically the tabloids. And he goes on about how the problem happens when the source of information is corrupt or racist or biased, and that filters out into society. And to me, I was just thinking, like, come on, man. Like, yes, the tabloids have and often do behave in horrific racist ways towards Meghan and countless others, but it is ludicrous to me for Harry to credit the UK press with poisoning the UK all on their own.
Yeah, the institution that he comes from has direct links to and profits from slavery, and the very symbol of monarchy, the crown jewels, contains a diamond that was stolen by colonial forces operating in the name of the monarchy, and which they have refused to return.
Yeah, it felt to me like a way of him sort of explaining it away to himself to minimise the role that his family has had in shaping the racism that is built into this country's DNA. And I saw a good tweet from the British novelist Talia Hibbert, who said, the only reason we even have a royal family is racism. The only reason no one dares attempt to get rid of them is huge sections of the population adore them as a symbol of the UK as a former superpower, and said superpower was violent, exploitative, parasitic mega racism.
Yeah, like literally it's that colonialism which has exported racism all around the globe. So no matter how much Harry wants us to believe that his concern is for everybody who's affected by racism, I really think that he is massively blinkered by his own specific experience, and I don't think he realises that.
Yeah, he is trapped. He has a lot that he needs to learn and unlearn. I think this is where it would have been really interesting to hear a Black British interviewer push back a bit, because obviously Oprah isn't familiar with the context of British racism in the way that someone that lives here or grew up here would be.
Yeah. Harry also talks about how things really changed for them after their first royal tour. Up until that point, the family were apparently really welcoming of Meghan, but that tour was the first time that the family got to see how incredible Meghan is at the job, and that brought back memories.
Cue Oprah bringing up The Crown season 4. So funny, like, I only know all this because I watched The Crown. Like most of the audience.
Yeah.
And Oprah describes Diana's real, like, superstar moment on Charles and Diana's 1983 tour of Australia, which was shown in the most recent season. And she asks Harry if there were hints of jealousy after Harry and Meghan's tour.
And Harry says, I just wish that we would all learn from the past. But to see how effortless it was for Meghan to come into the family so quickly in Australia and across New Zealand, Fiji and Tonga, and just be able to connect with people. You know, as we talked about, she was very much welcomed into the family, not just by the family, but by the world, certainly by the Commonwealth. Really, here you have one of the greatest assets to the Commonwealth that the family could have ever wished for.
I thought this was Harry, like, tacitly confirming that the royals saw Meghan as another Diana and felt threatened by her.
Yeah.
And was sort of explaining it in a way that would remind viewers of that, what was it, the 4th episode of season 4?
I thought it was great to have him explicitly pointing out as well exactly what it is that the royals have lost. Like, even if you want to take out the fact that they should, as human beings, just have been nice and welcoming to somebody that a member of their family wanted to marry, you know, they had this asset, and in treating her so badly, they really let down the Commonwealth, which we constantly hear so much about how the Queen loves the Commonwealth and it's her proudest.
Today it is Commonwealth Day.
Well, yeah. And, you know, him talking about all this rings especially true after they've lost their Queen's Commonwealth Trust positions.
Yeah, which happened after they did this interview. One thing that a lot of listeners noticed, that we noticed as well, is that Will gets off very lightly in this interview.
Very lightly.
Though Oprah does her best to get Harry to open up about the rift between them, all Harry will say is, I love William to bits. We've been through hell together and we have a shared experience, but we are on different paths. The relationship is space at the moment, and time heals all things, hopefully.
I wasn't surprised by this statement, really, because it did echo what he said in the ITV documentary over the Africa tour. This idea that, no, they're not in a great place right now, but Harry is clearly not prepared to say anything that is going to antagonise the situation. And it seemed to me, I mean, in the same way that he's going easy on the rest of his family members, you know, he, it seems to me, wants to have that relationship back with his brother at some point, and is keeping the door open for that.
Charles, however, isn't so lucky as Will.
Yeah, one of the big things from the teaser clip was Oprah asking whether the Sussexes had blindsided the Queen with their announcement that they were stepping back from royal duties last January. Harry said that he had too much respect for the Queen to have blindsided her, and that if he had to guess, he thinks the story about them blindsiding her could have come from within the institution.
Harry says that while they were in Canada, he had 3 calls with the Queen and 2 with Charles, talking about their decision to step back, before Charles stopped taking his calls. Oh my God, the most wow moment of this interview. Him just dropping that in before he stopped taking my calls.
Yeah. Just like...
Gasped!
And leaving it there for Oprah to...
pick up, which she did.
Yeah. So apparently this was after he'd been discussing their plans to step back, and after Charles had asked him to put their plan into writing, which he did with all the specifics, including even the date that they intended to announce that they were stepping back. And Harry says that Charles then stopped taking his calls because at that point Harry had taken matters into his own hands for the benefit of his family's mental health.
This is shocking to me. We had just been talking about how it seemed like Charles was so mysteriously absent from all of the conversations recently about the 1-year review and finalising the separation, and he just hadn't featured at all. But it seems, in Harry's telling anyway, that Charles was the villain all along.
They clearly are talking to some degree now, and Harry says there's a lot to work through there. I feel really let down because he's been through something similar. He knows what the pain feels like. I will always love him, but there's a lot of hurt that's happened. I will continue to make it one of my priorities to try to heal that relationship. And he acknowledges that Charles has been shaped by his own fucked up childhood and the Queen's shitty parenting.
Yeah, and it just was such a standout moment for me because Charles is having one of the worst years PR-wise of his life. And actually on the night of this interview, it was the Critics' Choice Awards in America, and The Crown won Best Drama Series.
Yeah.
As if anyone needed any other reminders of Charles's reprehensible behaviour throughout history. This is such a bad look for the future king. And given the reticence to name which member of the royal family was so concerned about how dark Archie's skin would be, if you've got to go between Charles and Will, and Harry seems eager to preserve good terms with Will, even mentioning that makes you wonder,
could it be Charles? But in case it's not that obvious what Charles's role might have been in the run-up to their stepping back, there was a bonus clip that came out today in which Harry talked about sending this letter that he was asked to prepare, sending it to Charles at the end of December, and the intention was for Charles to then share it with the relevant members of the institution. And when they got back from Canada on the 6th of January, they had been planning to take the Queen up on an invitation that she'd given them to Sandringham to come for tea, to talk about what their plans were and what was going on. And apparently she even said they should stay the night because they'd probably be very tired from all the travelling. When they landed, Harry had this message from his private secretary, quoting a message from the Queen's private secretary that said something like, "Tell Harry he's not to come to Norfolk, the Queen is busy all week."
Why is the Queen suddenly blowing off this plan? Is one of the Queen's puppeteers Charles? Is Charles calling the shots? I have raised wiggly eyebrows through this whole clip.
But Harry calls the Queen to ask about this, and the way that he relays this conversation with the Queen makes her sound like she's being held hostage. Apparently she's saying, there was actually something in her diary that she didn't know about, and now, the rest of the week is all full up too.
I should have looked this up, but I feel like we talked about this before and we looked at her diary, because I think it was reported that she had told him that she couldn't meet, and we went back and saw what she was doing those days, and as I'm sure it'll come as no surprise to anybody, there wasn't a lot going on.
Yeah. But overall, it seems that Harry and Meghan really push the narrative that the Queen is not in control over the course of this interview. And I mean, it is the only way that they can say the things that they say about the institution without explicitly making her responsible for them, I think. But it is good that Oprah then pushed back at this point and said, doesn't the Queen get to do what the Queen wants to do?
Yeah, like exactly what we are asking the whole time.
Yeah.
Harry gives this sort of cop-out answer where he says, when you're head of the firm, you're surrounded by people that give you advice. And he's sad that some of that advice is not very good.
It's such a cop-out framing it like this. It just takes all responsibility away from the Queen.
Yeah, without asking the question of why she doesn't question this bad advice or see it as bad advice.
Yeah, given she's meant to be this wise, like you were saying, all-knowing, bastion of knowledge.
Okay, we're almost at the end now. But then it got back to the security and into the financials, and Harry talked about how he had been cut off financially and that they removed his security while they were in Canada. The official reason, he was told, was their change in status. But after a few weeks, they confirmed him that there was no change in the level of threat towards him. And Meghan talked about how she was writing letters to the institution pleading that Harry's security would be kept on even if they couldn't provide security for her or Archie, which is just insane.
And the timing of this is really the key to it, because at this point the press knew where they were staying in Canada and they were going to be going into lockdown soon. So to lose security at this time and also have it announced that they would be losing security at this time. And, Meghan, as she says, she sees the death threats and the racist propaganda that's coming into them. And that would be a very dangerous situation for their family to be in.
Yeah, and he says this is part of the reason why they took the deals with Netflix and Spotify, that those weren't originally things that they had planned to do or wanted to do. But Harry says, I had to afford security for us. But I've got what my mum left me, and without that, we wouldn't have been able to do this. And they talk about how at one point they were so hard up, they had to rely on an offer from Tyler Perry. Again, he comes up again. This guy's role in the Harry and Meghan story is also, insane.
Yeah.
Tyler Perry and chickens. But anyway, he offered to cover their security by lending him the house that they stayed in, his house in California, and that's part of the reason why they left Canada to go to stay in his house. It's just so brutal.
Yeah, it was very brutal to watch and hear it put in those terms. I mean, I think you do kind of have to take a beat when you remember that what Diana left Harry is millions of pounds. But also security is incredibly expensive. So
yeah, I don't think it's so much a matter of the cost of it as the principle and not understanding what kind of risk Harry and Meghan face, and especially because we've heard over the years about the kind of death threats and the things they've received in the post and all kinds of stuff like this, that Clarence House would presumably be very aware.
Yeah.
And to pull that support is, to me, a very cold and unfeeling thing to do.
And incredibly irresponsible.
We talked at the start about how it opened with the fairy tale aspect of Harry and Meghan's romance. This fairy tale that also features chickens and Tyler Perry. But Meghan, during the course of the interview, while she's in the chicken coop, likens herself to the Little Mermaid when she says, "Oh my God, she falls in love with a prince and because of that she has to lose her voice. But by the end she gets her voice back." Clearly she's talking about the Disney movie, not the original Hans Christian Andersen story in which the mermaid dissolves into sea foam at the end. But the fairy tale thing comes back then again at the end when it ends on what I felt was a very saccharine note. And like, we talk about this all the time. Harry and Meghan are cheesy. They're really cheesy. And Meghan in particular is such a romantic. I would also consider myself a big romantic, and maybe you would say that of yourself too.
Yeah.
But this was
too much.
Way too much for me. Oprah asks about their fairy tale ending, and Meghan delivers this line. She says their story is greater than any fairy tale that you've ever read. I think Harry saved all of us. He ultimately called it. He made a decision that saved my life and saved all of us.
Yeah, it was very melodramatic or over the top.
Just way too neat.
Yeah.
On Twitter, the writer and podcaster Kaleshi Okafor, I thought she put it really well when she said, if Meghan was Little Mermaid, who is the Ursula who took her voice? There is a specific name and I want it. And we want it to... Like, the lasting impression I got from this interview is that there's so much more to discuss here. Like, when Oprah was on CBS this morning, she was saying that they had, like, 3.5 hours of footage. I'm like, why wasn't this interview 3 hours long? I would have watched 3, 4, 5 hours of this.
Yeah, I just really didn't want it to end when it was on. I wanted more and more and more.
And I felt like it wasn't really true to the tone of the interview to have this tidy, happily ever after sort of ending. One question that wasn't asked, but is certainly on everyone's minds today: should the monarchy be abolished? I would have loved had Oprah asked this.
I would have passed out, I think.
Maybe next time. Out of all of the things that were said in this interview, Tom, which one should be our quote of the week?
I think it has to be when Meghan said, they were willing to lie to protect other members of the family, but they weren't willing to tell the truth to protect me and my husband.
Yeah, this one really hit hard for me. We spent so much time talking about what we believe to be quotes from royal sources and aides, obviously designed to protect members of the family, and wondering why some rules seem to apply for particular members and not others. I'm thinking particularly of Prince Andrew.
Yeah, of course.
And I guess this was kind of the only sort of maybe possibly oblique reference to Andrew. Like, he did get that one mention at the start when we found out that Meghan first met the Queen at Andrew's house. But other than that, there was no reference to Andrew. So I'm choosing to take this as our little crumb.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to, like you say, zoom in on it quite a lot. But it would make sense to me if this is oblique reference, yeah.
As well as that, I think, you know, if we've got our real tinfoil hats on, you could consider this as perhaps a reference to the affair rumours surrounding Will.
Yeah.
Or on a more superficial level, the stories about Kate's hair extensions or the baby Botox.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of examples. I mean, in my wildest dreams, I had imagined they might broach the subject of Will's alleged affair. Obviously, they were never going to come out and, like, really get into that. But I love to imagine that this is a reference to that.
I do think, though, this was a really clear, concise way of giving voice to something that we have long suspected.
Yeah.
Lots of people who follow the royals felt similarly. And it was a way of putting pressure on the palace, or more particularly on the royal family, not just the institution, to take a good hard look at themselves.
What about Fit for a Queen?
I think we've got to talk about Meghan's outfit.
Mm-hmm.
This very long black dress, an Armani dress with a white lotus print.
Town and Country described it as a nod to the flower's ability to flourish despite seemingly challenging conditions. If you get the hint there.
like, to be honest, as I said to you when the first clips came out, this sadly just looked like a bird shit on this $5,000 dress.
So true. And as soon as you said that to me, it's all I've been able to see when I look at the dress.
And it's a pity. I thought it was a very unusual choice of dress. Like, it's very solemn, almost funereal. I thought, like, a strangely sort of somber choice for what was her first interview as a free woman. And I also thought Armani was a fascinating designer to go with. And, you know, was trying to do sort of figuring it out. Like, it's not an American designer, not a British designer, not really a designer with any, you know, sort of typical Meghan meaning behind it in terms of being sustainable or particularly accessible in price or female-led or any of that kind of stuff. And I was wondering, is that in itself sort of ultimate sign of freedom, that she can just wear whatever the fuck she wants to wear without having to perform any kind of sartorial diplomacy or worry about what, like, freaks like us are gonna read into it?
Yeah, and she can just focus on, you know, that Lotus message. But she also wore a diamond bracelet with it that belonged to Diana, and she had that heavy black eyeliner that was very reminiscent of Diana's makeup in the Panorama interview.
Yeah, straight away.
Yeah.
'Cause she never really wears such heavy ringed eyeliner like that. Yeah. Or not since she's been in the royal family. So I was wondering if that was maybe a little reference to Diana. But we've got to talk about, first in line, the true majestic figure in all this.
There was never any doubt in my mind. It's Oprah.
It's Oprah. Absolutely masterful interview. Like, I didn't grow up watching Oprah, and I only know her from, like, a few interviews, and I listened to that podcast, the Making of Oprah podcast, that was brilliant. But I hadn't really experienced, like, one of her big live interviews like this before, and it was just like exactly what you've always heard about Oprah. It was so brilliantly done, so sharp, she was so prepared, so engaged. Like, I really loved, you know, obviously very active listening, but her sort of genuine shock and emotion, like her emotional responses to the more, like, jaw-dropping moments, like the reveal about the family member asking about Archie's skin tone. It felt like she was a real proxy for the viewer in those moments. And I thought she knew when to stay silent, when to interrupt. I felt like she had exactly the right follow-up questions. She would sort of doggedly chase up when they were being kind of evasive in their answers. And then just when you thought she'd forgotten about something, she'd come back and pick up the thread again. Yeah,
it was so good. And she didn't even miss the chance to drop an Apple TV plug.
Oh, we loved that when she mentioned the TV series she's developing with Prince Harry.
Yeah.
Tick. She also, I thought, kind of acted as a proxy for the viewer when she played dumb a little at times, which is obviously part of the skill of being a good interviewer. But when she got them to talk about things like, how does media access work? Stuff, to get them to explain things in very basic terms. And I liked as well when she was sort of more chatty, because they're obviously friendly as well. And when she was talking about the pregnancy and the baby, and they were saying it was their second, and she was like, 2 and done. Like,
yeah. She had that, like, conversational way of putting them at ease, which was so key to getting them to open up. As I think I've said, like, thought she was amazing at pushing back on things that I haven't seen royals pushed on before. You know, stuff like, you know, Harry saying that he was trapped, or even those lines like, doesn't the Queen get to do what the Queen wants to do?
Yeah.
It just feels very unusual to see a royal being, like, really made to consider what it is they're saying.
Yeah, and I sort of feel like she's the only one who could have done this interview.
Yeah.
Because as much as I was saying it would be interesting to hear what a Black British interviewer might have had to ask about these kind of things or challenge certain aspects of what they were saying, particularly what Harry was saying, the Oprah doesn't have any reverence for the royal family.
Yeah.
And she doesn't feel like she has to respect the Queen. She can say things like, doesn't the Queen get to do what the Queen wants to do without worrying about, like, snubbing the Queen or whatever.
Yeah.
And I thought the way it shifted tone was just beautiful. Like, going from, what's Archie's favourite word right now, to things like, and did you blindside the Queen? Like, that's not easy.
No.
And such a stellar job. Just loved every minute of it.
Yeah. Incredible work.
Now, let us zoom out. What will you be taking away from this interview?
My main takeaway initially was, this is a historic event. It was, as we said, so masterfully executed, and I think it's something we're going to be talking about for days, months, years to come.
I think the message that I would take from this interview is that Harry and Meghan, definitely Meghan anyway, were absolutely right to get out. And although I would say that they were at pains to emphasise they didn't leave or walk away, that in their view they were slowly edged out by a lack of support, and in that way the interview kind of functions as a way of reframing the narrative of them as these sort of impulsive brats who stormed off without giving anyone a heads up or a chance to help them. Although after listening to them talk about it, it's pretty clear to me that they're not there with us just yet in wanting to abolish the monarchy.
Yeah, because they said that they would still be there had they been protected and supported in the ways that they thought they should have been.
And they are very careful about preserving anonymity, not assigning blame to particular individuals. It seems like they wanted it to be about, this is what happened to us, rather than this is what this person did to us.
Yeah. I do think, though, that even though that, like you said, preserving anonymity, and they save a lot of the vitriol for the press specifically, they do refer to the way that the institution leaks stories to the press. And they heavily imply that there's always an agenda behind what we read about the royals. We always get messages from people asking why we even talk about what's in the tabloids and accusing us of believing everything that we read. So I really would hope, as like a takeaway from this interview, that it makes it really clear why we do that. We read and talk about them because these stories are there for a reason.
It's not really about believing the stories, but about identifying the underlying narrative that the palace's press machine may be trying to push, because that is kind of the closest we get to ever knowing the quote-unquote truth, or what these people believe to be the truth about what's going on in the royal family.
I think it's also important to note that while there were so many bits of this interview that I found shocking, it wasn't because I was surprised at a lot of the actions that they described in terms of members of the family or people in the institution. Like, I think you have to be pretty naive to think that there's no racists in the royal family and that the institution isn't full of people with a sinister agenda. What was shocking was the fact that we had two people sitting there talking openly about these things.
I mean, I think you're saying that as someone who pays like an obsessive amount of attention to the royal family.
Thank you.
As do I. But I thought Meghan in particular was excellent, very careful to explain things in a way that non-obsessive viewers would understand. Things like when Harry would mention his private secretary and she'd say, oh, that's like this. Or when they talk about the institution, what is the institution? And when she makes it clear that the royal family is not just like celebrities, that it's a whole different ball game. Obviously, listening to this, couldn't help but feel that you wish that she had known all this before going in.
Yeah, I feel like it would have been so helpful to her to know that.
I also found it very interesting to hear the kind of language she used to talk about members of the royal family and things like the firm, which we talked about in our last episode, but that she was calling Kate Kate and not Catherine, because the royals have this absolutely like iron fist approach to never calling Kate Kate. You have to call her Catherine.
Yeah, and then Meghan straight out is talking about Kate and Fergie rather than Sarah or Sarah Ferguson.
And I did think as well, it was, as we said, very moving and very smart of Meghan when she was describing her mental health struggles, that she referred to specific pictures that we would all be familiar with, those pictures from the Royal Albert Hall in that sequin dress, because as well as giving you a visual, it also reminds us that not everything is as it seems, and you never know what's going on behind the scenes.
Hearing Meghan talking about her struggles was really heartbreaking, and I think it kind of brought up again for us the question of, is Harry worth it?
Yeah, and I said this before, I think after we read Finding Freedom, that this man is not worth all this trouble. I mean, to be clear, like, no man is worth
yeah.
all the shit that Meghan has gone through. And as well as that, like, you know, watching this, it's not as if you or I need any more confirmation that the monarchy should be abolished. But hearing Meghan talk about her experiences and how painful that was, like, it's so clear that this needs to happen soon. Like, with these allegations about how he treats members of his own family, Prince Charles cannot be king.
I know. Once again, we hear about how reprehensible Charles is.
And I think, you know, when we talk on this podcast, sometimes we don't take Charles very seriously because he really lends himself to sort of silliness with fucking squirrels eating out of his pockets and stuff like that. But this really hammers home this man should not be king.
Ever.
I think overall, though, the interview for me, hearing Harry and Meghan talk about the royal family, it painted a really, really ugly portrait of the monarchy as outdated, as dysfunctional, as cowardly, terrified of the tabloids, and completely oblivious to things like racism and mental health.
Which just makes their hypocrisy all the more clear when racism in football is one of Will's favourite topics at the moment, and the mental health, like you said, is such a big deal for them to be talking just vapidly about.
And I think, again, it shows the royal family to be an institution which has lost all relevance and just doesn't work for anyone other than this very narrow, very white norm that it has set for itself.
And it's really important to note that by having set that norm for themselves and defined it so clearly, that's such a huge gift for the white supremacists in the UK, because the royals are meant to represent British values.
I have to say, like, in the lead up to this interview, when we've been talking about it, I'd been saying, like, oh my God, is this going to be the start of something? Like, could this actually be the beginning of a groundswell to abolish the monarchy? And obviously that remains to be seen. And, you know, we're not going to talk about the reaction, obviously now, we'll do that next time. But the royal family have weathered many scandals in the past just by doing nothing. And we don't yet know if this time will be any different. Yeah,
and it absolutely kills me that they can get away with shit by just not doing anything. It makes me very, very angry. But we talked about how we didn't think Harry really came across that well in this interview, and certainly at times came across badly. But I do think it's very probable that a lot of white people will respond well, once again, to him talking about doing the work to overcome his unconscious bias and the blinkers of his privileged background, and they might genuinely feel sorry for him and his, quote, trapped family. So I think even though we are quite critical of him, it's probably going to look good for him regardless.
I'm sure we're going to be talking about this for weeks, months, years. It really set a new standard for, like, a tell-all interview. I didn't think we'd get better royal drama than the Andrew Newsnight interview.
Yeah, I thought that was the gold standard, but we've gone platinum, baby.
So, oh my God, thank you so much if you've gotten this far. Thank you for listening. 2 episodes in a week. Nonsense. We're probably, like, not even making sense at this point because we're so deprived of sleep.
Yeah, we need to get some sleep now, I think.
But thank you so much for listening, and we hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
That's a really loaded piece of toast. mean, you have to laugh at a certain point because it's just ridiculous.
That's good. That's a loaded piece of toast.